There is a red liquid that costs about $1 and frees a rusted, seized bolt in seconds. Not loosens it a little, not softens it for next weekend. Freeze it completely, the kind of bolt that has been welded to your frame by 20 winters of road salt. The mechanic who showed it to me poured it on a rusted exhaust stud that 3 different shops had given up on, tapped the head twice with a hammer, fit a wrench, and the nut spun off like it was brand new. No heat, no torch, no drill, no $200 extractor kit. Just a few ounces of a red fluid you can pour from a bottle that has been sitting on hardware store shelves for 60 years, mixed with one other thing you already have under your sink. In a controlled bench test, this homemade red liquid beat every famous penetrating spray on the market, including the expensive one professionals swear by. And it wasn't close. Then somebody in the repair business did the math. Because a rusted bolt is not a small problem. It is one of the most profitable accidents in the entire automotive world. The global auto parts aftermarket moves over $500 billion a year, and a shocking slice of that money flows through one tiny point of failure: the fastener that won't come loose. Every snapped exhaust stud, every rounded suspension bolt, every seized brake bleeder turns a 30-minute job into a $400 one. You don't pay for the part. You pay for the bolt that destroyed itself on the way out, and the labor to dig out what's left. A $1 liquid that makes that bolt surrender on the first try is not a convenience to the people who profit from broken hardware. It is a threat. They didn't stop talking about it because it failed. They stopped talking about it because it worked far too well. This is the story of the red liquid, automatic transmission fluid, and the dead simple mix that turns it into the most effective bolt-freeing penetrant a regular person can make. It's a story of railroad machinists, farm shops, military motor pools, and one published bench test that the spray can companies would rather you never read. If stories like this one matter to you, the cheap, the proven, the things they'd rather you forgot, the subscribe button is the best way to make sure they keep reaching you. Now let me show you exactly what it is, why it works, and how to use it tonight. It starts with the color. Pour out a quart of automatic transmission fluid, and the first thing you notice is that it's red. That red isn't an accident, and it isn't there to look nice. Transmission fluid was dyed red on purpose, decades ago, so that a mechanic could tell a transmission leak apart from engine oil or brake fluid at a glance. A puddle under the car in dark amber was the engine. A puddle in bright red was the gearbox. The dye was a diagnostic tool, but that red fluid was engineered to do something far more interesting than mark its own leaks. Transmission fluid has to creep into the tightest clearances inside a gearbox, cling to metal under enormous pressure, carry detergents that lift grime, and keep steel sliding against steel without welding itself together. It is, by design, a thin, creeping, clinging anti-seize lubricant. And somewhere along the way, a mechanic with a stuck bolt and a bottle of the red stuff on the bench made the obvious leap. He poured it on the threads, and it crawled in. The story, as the old-timers tell it, is that transmission fluid alone worked better than the engine oil and kerosene most people reached for. But the real breakthrough came when somebody thinned that red fluid with acetone, the same fast-evaporating solvent in nail polish remover and paint thinner. Half transmission fluid, half acetone. The acetone was watery thin and aggressive. It dissolved the grease and bit at the rust, and because it was so light it raced into cracks no oil could follow. And it dragged the red fluid in with it. Then the acetone flashed off into the air and left the clinging, slippery transmission oil sitting exactly where you needed it. Deep in the threads, between the rust and the steel. Two cheap fluids that on their own were merely useful became, mixed together, something that embarrassed products costing 10 times as much. And here's the part that tells you it's real. Nobody owns this discovery because everybody made it. Talk to an old railroad machinist and he'll tell you the boys in the roundhouse cut their oil with solvent to break frozen fittings on locomotives long before anyone sold a spray can. Talk to a farmer who kept tractors alive through the Dust Bowl in the war years, and he'll describe the same red and thin mix used to free implements rusted solid in the field. Walk into a military motor pool, and you'd find sergeants keeping 50-year-old trucks running with bench-brewed penetrant because the issued cans ran out and the work didn't. Different men, different decades, different corners of the country, no way to compare notes. And they all arrived at the same answer. A thin solvent to open the path, a creeping oil to hold the ground. That is not a coincidence. That is not folklore. That is convergent chemistry. When dozens of people who never met independently land on the identical formula, you are not looking at a rumor. You are looking at a law of physics that the people selling you the alternative would prefer you experience as a happy accident. So let's talk about why it actually works, because the mechanism is so simple, it almost feels like cheating. A rusted bolt is not glued in place by a solid block of rust. It's held by rust that has grown into the microscopic threads and along the seam where the bolt meets the metal. A maze of cracks and channels far too narrow for a thick oil to enter. To break that bolt free, your fluid has to do one thing. Get all the way down into those channels to the actual rust bond and lubricate it. The force that pulls a liquid into a gap that narrow is called capillary action. The same force that pulls water up into a paper towel. And capillary action is ruthless about what it rewards. It rewards low surface tension and low viscosity. In plain terms, thin and slippery and not afraid to spread. A good penetrant has a surface tension down around 20 to 30 dynes per centimeter and a viscosity thinner than water, which lets it wick into gaps as small as 5/10,000ths of an inch. Water can't get in there, thick oil can't get in there, but the right fluid can. That's exactly what the acetone and transmission fluid mix is engineered to do, except you engineered it on your workbench in 30 seconds. The acetone is the scout. It has almost no surface tension and the viscosity of water, so it floods into every crack in the rust instantly, dissolving grease and softening the corrosion as it goes. But acetone alone would just evaporate and leave the bolt dry and stuck. So it carries the transmission fluid in on its back. The acetone races down the channel, the red oil rides along, the acetone evaporates and vanishes into the air, and the slippery, clinging transmission fluid is left coating the threads from the inside out, exactly where the rust used to be the only thing touching steel. The solvent opens the door. The oil walks through and stays. The rust that was holding the bolt prisoner becomes the very highway the fluid travels to reach the heart of the seizure. The problem becomes the path to the solution. You don't have to take an old mechanic's word for it, and you don't have to take mine. In April of 2007, a magazine called Machinist's Workshop did something the spray can companies have never advertised. They ran a clean, controlled test. They took identical nuts and bolts, rusted them all the exact same way, and measured the torque it took to break each one loose after treatment. With no penetrant at all, the nut took 516 foot-pounds to move. WD-40 brought that down to 238. The famous blue can, PB Blaster, got it to 214. Liquid wrench, 127. Kano Croyle, the one machinists whisper about, the expensive professional's choice, cut it to 106. And the homemade 50-50 mix of acetone and automatic transmission fluid, 53 foot-pounds. Half of Croyle. A third of PB Blaster. Nearly 10 times easier than dry. The cheapest thing in the test, mixed in a garage from 2 bottles, beat every commercial product on the shelf. And it didn't squeak by, it doubled the best of them. Sit with that number for a second, because it's the whole story in one statistic. The product you can make for pocket change outperformed the product engineered by a chemical company with a marketing budget by a factor of 2. That's not a tie. That's not just as good. That's a homemade fluid making the professional standard look slow. And it raises a question that the people selling penetrant in a can do not want you asking out loud. If a 50-50 mix of 2 of the cheapest fluids in the building beats everything on the shelf, then what exactly are you paying for when you buy the shelf? If knowing things like this is the reason you're still here, do me one favor and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this kind of information from getting buried under another 100 sponsored reviews. To understand why this got quiet, you have to understand where seized bolts actually hurt. Not in a clean shop with a parts budget. They hurt where machines have to keep running, and there is no money to replace what breaks. In the heavy equipment world, in the trucking yards, in the motor pools that kept aging fleets alive through wars and lean years, a frozen bolt was not an inconvenience, it was a vehicle down, a line stopped, a job that didn't get done. And in those places, men did not wait for a spray can. They mixed their own because the homemade brew worked better and cost almost nothing, and they could make a gallon of it from supplies already on the shelf. The cans were for customers. The brew was for people who couldn't afford to fail. That tells you everything about which one actually works, and that is precisely where the trouble starts. Because a permanent, dirt-cheap fix to a seized bolt is wonderful for you, and catastrophic for an entire revenue model built on bolts that don't come out clean. Think about what a stuck fastener is worth to the repair economy. The bolt snaps, and now you need a replacement. You need an extractor kit. You need cobalt drill bits because the old ones skate off hardened steel. You need a tap to chase the threads, or a thread insert when the hole is ruined, or a whole new part when the insert won't hold. And above all, you need labor, hours of it, billed at a shop rate, because digging a broken stud out of an aluminum manifold is delicate, miserable work. A bolt that comes out clean on the first pull erases all of it. No extractor sale, no replacement part, no billable hours. From the point of view of a business that sells the cure for broken bolts, a liquid that stops bolts from breaking in the first place is not a product to celebrate. It is a problem to manage. And the way you manage a fix that can't be sold is simple. You make sure it stays a workshop rumor instead of common knowledge. You can't patent a 50-50 mix of two things anyone can buy. You can't put a trademark on it. You can't build a recurring business on a formula a teenager can copy in a parking lot. So it never gets the budget, never gets the ad, never gets the shelf. The recurring problem stays a recurring problem. That is not a conspiracy of villains in a room. It is something quieter and more durable. An entire industry with no reason on earth to teach you the cheap answer, and every reason to sell you the expensive one. So instead, they sell you the idea of it. Turn over almost any can of penetrating spray and read what's actually inside. You will find in some combination light petroleum oils and a thin solvent carrier and a propellant to push it out of the nozzle. That's the formula. A solvent to creep in. An oil to lubricate. The exact same two jobs your red mix does, performed by the exact same two kinds of ingredient. You are buying solvent and light oil, aerosolized for convenience, wrapped in a brand name and a logo, marked up many times over what the raw fluids cost. There is nothing evil about charging for convenience. The can is genuinely easier to grab. But understand what you're paying the premium for. You are not buying a secret, you are buying packaging. The chemistry in the dollar store bottle of transmission fluid is, in the ways that matter for a stuck bolt, the same chemistry doing the work in the can. And when somebody put them head-to-head on a rusted nut and measured it, the homemade version didn't just match the can. It buried it. And nobody pays for that gap more than you. In your own driveway, on a Saturday you'll never get back. You know exactly the bolts I mean. The exhaust flange studs that shear off flush the instant you breathe on them, leaving you to drill into hardened steel at an angle you can't reach. The suspension bolts seized into their sleeves so hard the whole control arm twists before the nut moves. The brake bleeder screws that round off and strip, turning a 15-minute bleed into a caliper replacement. The oxygen sensor welded into the manifold by exhaust heat and road salt. Every one of them is a chance for the bolt to win, and for you to lose an afternoon, a knuckle, and $100. You have been told the only honest answers are heat, force, and replacement. You've been told you need a torch. You do not. You need to get the right fluid into the threads before you ever put a wrench on it. and the right fluid is the red one, thinned to do its job. So here is exactly how to do it, and here's where I need you to actually listen, because this involves a flammable solvent, and there is one rule you do not break. Mix it 50-50 by volume. Equal parts automatic transmission fluid and acetone. Use an old-school red transmission fluid if you can. It blends with acetone more cleanly than some modern synthetics. Mix only a small batch, a few ounces at a time, what you'll use that day, and mix and store it in a glass jar or metal container. Never most plastics, because acetone eats right through many plastics and rubber seals and will melt a cheap bottle in your hand. Now the rule. Acetone is extremely flammable. Its vapors catch from a spark and its flash point is far below freezing. So this is a no-flame job, start to finish. No torch, which is the whole point, you don't need one. No cigarette, no grinder throwing sparks, no work near a water heater's pilot light. Do it in the open air or a well-ventilated space, wear nitrile gloves and eye protection, and keep the mix away from anything that could ignite it. The title promised no torch, and the chemistry is the reason. With this fluid, fire isn't a tool. It's a hazard. With that understood, the technique is almost insultingly simple. Get the fluid onto the threads, drip it or brush it on, and whenever you can, apply it from above so gravity and capillary action pull it down into the joint. Then take a hammer and give the bolt head a few solid taps. That's not for show. The shock sends a vibration through the fastener that cracks the rust's grip and opens the microscopic channels, and the thin acetone floods straight in. Now wait, give it minutes for a lightly stuck bolt and for something truly seized. Soak it, tap it, and walk away. Let it sit for an hour or overnight, reapplying once or twice. Patience here is free. A snapped bolt is not. When you come back, don't just crank on it. Work it gently, back and forth. Loosen a hair, tighten a hair, loosen a little more, so the fluid keeps working into the threads, and you never load the bolt hard enough to snap it. Use a 6-point socket or a box-end wrench, never a worn open end that rounds the corners. And the bolt that beat 3 shops gives up to $2 of fluid and a little patience. A quart of transmission fluid runs a few dollars, a can of acetone a few more, and that makes a working batch for the price of a vending machine snack. Against the 100+ a shop charges the moment a stud breaks off in your hands. I watched it settle an argument once. A guy I know was halfway through pulling the exhaust on a 20-year-old pickup that had spent every winter of its life on a salted northern road. And the manifold studs were the worst kind. Rust welded, no clean metal left to grab. The shop had quoted him to drill and re-tap all of them. Instead, he soaked every stud in the red mix the night before, tapped each head with a hammer, and let it sit until morning. Then he went down the row with a wrench. 5 of the 6 broke loose clean. The 6th took a second soak and another hour. Not one of them snapped. The same studs a professional wanted to drill out came free in his own driveway, for the cost of 2 bottles he already owned. The difference between his Saturday and the $400 version wasn't skill or strength or a better tool. It was knowing what to pour on the threads before he ever picked up the wrench. Because that is the whole secret, and it was never really hidden, just unspoken, by everyone with a reason not to say it. The railroad machinist knew it, cutting his oil with solvent in the roundhouse. The Dust Bowl farmer knew it, freeing his plow with the red mix when there was no money for anything else. The motor pool sergeant knew it, keeping tired trucks running on a brew the supply chain never sent. The old mechanic at the end of the block knew it. The one who freed the Bolt 3 shops couldn't and never explained how. And one magazine in 2007 finally measured it and put a number on what all of them already knew. 516 foot-pounds of stuck steel brought down to 53 by the cheapest fluid in the room. $500 billion a year in parts and labor liens, in part, on the quiet hope that you'll keep reaching for the expensive can, that you'll keep believing the only answers are heat, force, and a new part. They were never the only answers. The real one has been sitting in plain sight, dyed bright red for 60 years. So now you know what the cans don't print and the shops don't volunteer. Pour the red, thin it with the clear, keep it far from any flame, tap the head, and wait. If this saved you a bolt, or saved you from buying one more thing you didn't need, pass it to the next person staring down a rusted fastener and a torch they were told to buy. Every person who learns the cheap proven answer is one less afternoon lost and one less easy sale made. Subscribe if you want more of the things they'd rather stayed quiet. There are more of these than you'd believe, and the next one's coming soon.